Amazing. So thank you all for being here. The 10th call, the 10th choice, agreement versus expectation. And I would love to hear from someone who wants to start us off, wants to give us a direction for the conversation. Perhaps you've had an insight whilst reading the book or listening to the audio over the last week. Perhaps you've come across some expectations that were hidden that you've started to notice. Sean,
Hello, sir.
hello.
How are you doing? Hi, everyone. Regs and noobs. Good to see you all. This distinction really made me think about where it's. It reminded me of an old 1950s kind of B movie. Aliens are everywhere. It's like expectations are everywhere. It's because they are. It struck me that they've become interwoven with a lot of how, and I had sort of flashbacks to working environments more so than anything, possibly sparked by the chapter about the factory, but it just struck me that things like meetings with management, how they were just sort of ingrained with expectation, and often as feigned agreements. I remember reading in one part where it talks about an agreement's not an agreement if one person doesn't really agree with it. It's they kind of go, yeah, all right then. That's what the words are saying, but inside they're probably going, oh, there's no way I'm going to do that, or I'm not cool with that really. But they'll agree for saying that there's an agreement in place, and it was like, how management would often say, right, so we need to do these, or we need to produce this efficiency, or we need to adopt this particular method. So we expect you all to read up on it and brief it and do, and even within the sentence itself, it's just hidden. It pours out so eloquently that it just kind of becomes, it's just another word within the sentence. So we just expect you to do that, or well, that's what we expected you to do and you didn't do it, so see you bye type thing. It is just everywhere, and then that got me thinking about sort of where I've sort of had those expectations. And again, Steve in the book, I love the getting the child to tidy the room expectation. It's like, I expect you to do your room and to know that I'm thinking that you should be tidying your room. That's the best one. Expectations turns everybody into psychics, because people should automatically know what I'm thinking and what I expect them to do. Because then it'll get done, rather than me freaking out when it isn't. So it was just that noticing of how widespread expectations are within our lives, without us kind of realizing it until we take that time to really sit with it and go, yeah, do you know what? I lost me, I lost me temperature, or we had an argument about that. But actually, really, that was just because I was expecting something to happen that didn't, and probably didn't verbalize it. So therefore, it was never going to, reach a conclusion that would meet my expectations, because I didn't even tell people what it was. You know. Yeah, that's it. That's me started for 10.
Yeah, I love that. You seem particularly struck by the factory example that Steve Chandler gives, and what jumped out at me with that is the lack of communication and therefore the lack of understanding in that business. And I had a gig just before Christmas, and a couple of the guys in the band are teachers, like full-time teachers in schools. And they described to me this structure where you've got sort of a board and then the teachers, and they never actually meet. The communication goes through various different bodies, etc., and there's some kind of trickle down, and the information that eventually reaches the teachers is so far removed from anything, and it's all delivered with expectation oozing out of it. Just get it done. We've got Ofsted in. Just get it done. I don't care how. So do the teachers and do they ever meet? It's like, no, we don't know what they look like. It's just like, on an email. Okay, wow. So a complete breakdown of communication. And if there's not communication, there can't be an understanding. And that was one of the things in the factory example. The leaders there didn't actually understand. For example, they were really understaffed.
And actually, something that just popped into my mind then when you were talking about this, the school example was something that I saw, might have been last week, where they were talking about the number of children that are going into schools that aren't toilet trained. And they were interviewing various people, and sort of one of the teachers was like, well, you know, we expect children to turn up to school being toilet trained. And then this other teacher was like, yeah, but we've not actually communicated that to anyone. It's just it's an assumption that's kind of been there since the year, you know. And I was just like, yeah, the you know, there's this thing that people are having real sort of complaints and ire about, but actually there's nothing that's ever been communicated to the parents that, you know, look, do you agree that this is something that will be in place by the time your child starts school? You know, it's, well, we expect them to be toilet trained. It's like, oh, okay. So, you know, you can see how it trips you up, you know.
Yeah, wow. I just wrote down here, you know, agreements are about words, right? Agreements require communication. It's spoken, it is the giving and receiving of word. Whereas so many expectations, particularly the hidden expectations, the ones we don't even notice that we're placing, that's an internal thing. We're not even fully aware of it. So how can we communicate it? So we just go around with this slightly bitter feeling, and we're not entirely sure why.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, those word traps. And another chapter that I really needed to tip my hat to was the one about Alan Watts. I thought that was brilliant. What a fantastic approach to officiating marriage. You know, in terms of if either of you has got any sort of inkling of you expect something of your partner to change, I ain't going to do the ceremony. And I'm like, that's so cool. You know what I mean? That's like, because that's that whole thing of an expectation that something will be modified, you know? And it's like, that's even entered your head. It's like, not happening. which is great. And, you know, and being open to say that to people, you know. Speaks again, the word kind of integrity shone up for me in that chapter. You know.
Yeah. Alan Watts's integrity but also the integrity that he's role modeling, and almost that's a very cutting statement, isn't it? If you have any expectation that either of you are going to change after this isn't happening via me.
Yeah.
That's one of those statements that no bullshit, just cut straight through.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any more you'd like to share?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much. I shall polish the dance floor for someone else to quick step onto.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, man.
Karen.
Oh, did you see how I got my hand up early? Because I am going to drive at 8. Right. So, yes, with Sean's thing about the agreements that aren't really agreed are not agreements. The bit on the factory example, which was really good, was that it took quite a few levels of communication and checking in before they got the real agreement. You know, and it wasn't until they could get there, well, what would it need for me to give you, for you to give me your word? You know, it was all about that, wasn't it? Because people don't like breaking their word. And until you can get, I love that question. What would we need to have for you to be able to give me your word? Then that's it, isn't it? And then they've got time to actually really think about it. I just love that bit. But the thing that really struck me it was, I've listened to expectations versus agreement countless times, and there was unexpectedly in number 10, life is an unexpected pleasure, was the sentence that just, I've read it before and I just obviously missed it, was people are put on this planet to amuse us, not to live up to our expectations. They have no other purpose than to be amusing and lovable. And then on the next page, it says, our job is to love them. That's all it is. You know, like, if their purpose is for our amusement and for them to be lovable, and our purpose is to love them, that just blew my mind. I loved it so much. It takes so much crap out of the situation. And I think when we can't see the expectations that we're having, if we just remind ourselves that their only job is that, or their only purpose is that, and our only purpose is to love them, then all of those moments when we're not just enjoying them, we can then see the judgments and the expectations that we're making. But I thought that was just like, cool. That's like the answer to peace everywhere, isn't it? It was just brilliant. So I was just quite blown away in my own little way about that one.
I also had a moment reading that bit, and I tend to have a pencil and underline a particular line or draw a square around a paragraph.
I've got a big circle and arrows.
I drew a big circle around the whole bit. I thought that there was such a feeling of peace and letting go. And I think that it's as you say, the judgments and expectations, that's the bit we're letting go of. Drop all the unnecessary bit.
And then the resentments. There are none, are there? And if you start from that that just position of love and curiosity and joy, then it's just natural if you want something to happen to just ask them, would you mind doing that? That would be really lovely. And they're more likely to say yes if you come from that energy.
And this is the stance that I think fundamentally Steve Chandler's offering in this distinction. Drop the expectation, walk lighter, and form agreements when you need to, when it is useful to, when it serves the relationship, when it serves both of you. And what you pointed to, when the leaders in this factory setting were trained by Steve Chandler and woke up to the power of agreements, and he asks, okay, what would it take for us to have an agreement here? There's a two-way service. So, okay, in the middle of two people, there's an agreement that can be formed, and it comes from a place of mutual service, mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels so much lighter than, oh, just get on with it, just get it done. We're not going to have a conversation. I'm not going to understand, just do it.
And of course, then people feel heard, don't they? It's less us and them. Oh, they don't understand. Because I've been in corporations where we were expected to do things. And, we were like, oh, yeah, yes, sir, yes, sir. And we put our big positive smiles on and, until they're out of sight and then the swearing starts, But what was it? There was something that came to my mind then about, oh no, it's gone. Oh, this happens. My tea leaf brain, it'll come back. Oh, it was when you were saying about, oh yeah, the bit I really liked about that was when it goes wrong and they realize that their agreement wasn't strong enough, that they've obviously missed something when they formed their agreement, and it was neither of their fault because they went into it with both with the best of intentions, but they just need to get better at structuring their agreements. And I love that because then, the biggest problem I've got with that I've had with either working in an environment where there's a manager or a leader and an underling, or working with clients who've got their own businesses. And so many of them don't like confrontation. And they really, really let other people wreck their businesses because they're too scared. Or they're just like, oh, I just bury my head in the sand. Oh, I just can't stand it. I'm off my words. I can't do it. And it's just awful because the people lower down won't have a job if that business doesn't survive. So they owe it to themselves and to the other people. But then there's no need to have confrontation when you're coming at it with this kind of attitude of being heard and listening and coming to an agreement and words being committed to, and all the personal goes out the window. So there's never a need to get personal and to blame someone and to shame someone, even if it's yourself.
But agreements transform that conversation from I told you to we agreed to. Let's revisit the agreements, not what I told you to do. There's a rub in that. I've never seen that conversation go particularly well. Doubling down on, I told you to this, and pushing a little bit further on that weight that you've already created versus, and it's a two-way street. I think there's enormous power when leaders also turn around and call themselves out and go, do you know what? I fell out of that agreement. I didn't uphold that. Can we revisit that and have a conversation? And again, it takes the person out of it. It's about the agreement. I think what you've pointed to there is awesome as well. You know, agreements can be strengthened, upgraded. You can innocently miss something and go back and go, oh, do you know what? Actually, we missed something there. Let's have a conversation and create something. There's something in what you mentioned about that those, if I heard you right, sort of corporate environments, you'd have the sort of happy smiley face on the front end, and then you go out for a lunch break or at the end of the day, and that's where the swearing and all of that would begin. And I'm pretty sure everyone here has also been in that situation. And there is something I've had the classic is band situations where you show up and do a job. Maybe it's a band leader that's particularly tyrannical, or there's some sort of culture and a bit of a rub and some friction. And there's it is I don't know if addictive is the word. There can be a kind of self-righteous enjoyment of getting in the car or the van afterwards with everyone and communally crucifying whoever has upset you the most. And you can get a real nice buzz off, the us and them thing. The experience of it can feel quite nice in that moment. And then when you take the bird's eye view and go, I never enjoy the gigs. I enjoy bitching in the van about, the band leader after the gig, but I'm not actually enjoying the job. Okay, there's something up here. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that reminds me. But my last band that I was in, oh yeah, like we'd have the 4-hour rehearsal and then we'd be on the phone to each other all the way home, moaning about the one person, like when we were going to sack them. And we did bond over this. It was great. And when we finally sacked the person, it was brilliant. We should have done it earlier. Oh dear. Perhaps we should have had an agreement earlier. But oh my gosh. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Let someone else chip in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Chris.
Hey, my friends. Very provocative stuff here. Section 2, it's actually possible to have no expectations of anyone. Can you imagine such a world? So let's start there. People will not live up to your expectations. Most people will try to not live up to your expectations, but they will try to keep their word. So this makes me think of how well, okay. I think there's been in the modern era, I don't want to get too broad about it, but in the modern era, certainly, we have all become so accustomed to being so casual about our communications, our plans, breaking plans, making plans, breaking plans. And I certainly in my life have still do, encounter those situations where you meet up with someone, oh, we should get together, we should have coffee, we should do this, we should do that. And you have that little nagging thought within, like, do either of us really mean this right now? I'm not sure that we do. I'm not sure, but it's a pleasantry. It's so fine. But as casual as we are about that, though, when we come at it from a place of no, let's actually make the plan. Can we schedule that right now? I think it catches people off guard. It makes me think of how, like, and especially for those of us in the entertainment industry, there are those. Well, there's that line from, is it Annie Hall talking about Hollywood? Hollywood's worse than dog eat dog. Its dog doesn't return other dogs' phone calls. And certainly, like Seinfeld made that series was all based upon unmet expectations. Had a nice long run and a very entertaining one, but basically exploiting that. And then even there's the offshoot in Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's at one time when Larry David's wife is dressing him down about him being upset with at a certain situation or a certain person, she says, you have all these rules. You come into, and yet nobody knows them. Nobody knows your rules. Nobody can see inside your head. So how can you people to act according to your expectations and meet your criteria? I just think we're all so used to living this way that for someone to come along and say, you know what, this is really simple. Let's just, if we're going to agree to defer a decision, let's do that. If we're going to agree to a meeting or whatever it is, let's just do it right now. And let's take the heat out of this expectation that maybe both of us are bringing into this and put it onto a third entity that then can and work through that together. I think we do ourselves a service, and I think we are more memorable, whether or not memorable. I think whether it's in our personal relationships, for me with my partner, me with other people that I'm perhaps negotiating with or looking towards negotiating with, and saying, well, yeah, I know the communication here is always haphazard, but I tell you what, I need to know. I'm going to ask specific questions, and I'll say yes or no to this opportunity based on. And it's okay if this opportunity isn't right for me, it's fine. But I at least want to have all the information going in so that you and I agree that we've at least that we've got an agreement, and I know what I'm signing up for. So then I don't have any. I have no justification for going back afterwards and complaining about the decision I made and the situation I've gotten myself into because I didn't ask the right questions. Yeah, I think there was just one more thing. I would say that in my experience too, that once I've been able to tap into that place where I'm able to let most of my expectations of others go, or my expectations of a situation, it is so freeing. He talks about that in section 12, right? Life beyond just good enough. Yeah, and it also is a way of taking responsibility. I'm responsible for my own well-being. What I expected from you, if I didn't communicate it, is not your fault. And that could be in my most personal relationships or my business relationships or the world and society in general, right? I mean, we don't like giving up that right to complain. I think we're not used to it. I do it all the time. But I do enjoy that feeling of freedom when I say, you know what, this is on me. This is on me. It's much easier if I just take responsibility for this now. Say, this situation wasn't what I thought it was going to be, but because I didn't ask the right questions. I mean, that's what I got. Thank you.
Thank you. I've written a few things here.
That was a lot. Sorry.
No. Thank you. I love that you've brought responsibility into this, and when I was writing up some notes earlier, I wrote down mutual ownership, and I think that is what agreements offer. There's a true ownership on both parties, or however many people are in on the co-creation of an agreement. There's ownership. There's a responsibility that everyone's taking on, and that can't happen when it's an I told you to situation, or I am telling you to. There's an expectation that one person owns, but where's the ownership for the receiver of that? You've just been given an order.
Yeah.
That's difficult to feel like you have ownership of, and therefore a little bit harder to take responsibility of, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I think in these entertainment industries too, it's rampant, and we're all just so used to it that we don't question it, and we don't. So that's, I guess, what I was trying to get at, um, is that when you actually try to bring some responsibility into the negotiation process around whatever it is, that you will stand out, for the right reasons, I think. Um,
I agree, and I think that it feels better for people for everyone to be in on the thing that's being created. That's treating people like adults. Do you
yeah.
know that
Yes.
the telling to, giving orders to, I expect this, it's how you would treat a child versus like, should we co-create something here and we all get a slice of the pie? We all get to walk away from this with some ownership and responsibility for making this thing happen, or whatever the situation is.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. And you mentioned sort of complaints there. And one part of this chapter that I love is how Steve Chandler reverse engineers complaints to create agreements. Such a smart little thing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, complaint can become a request. And in that request, a conversation is had and an agreement can be formed. I think that is so simple and
Yeah.
effective and smart.
Yeah. When it works.
Hmm.
But I think it's helpful because we know too that there are sometimes we get in these conversations and we realize, oh, um, this person's not ready to have their problem taken away yet, and I can't do anything about it right now. So maybe I'll have to check back in later and see if there's anywhere else to go in this conversation. You know. Um,
Is there any more you'd like to?
no, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Kate.
Thank you. Um, if it's okay to share, I have had a living example of this with somebody that I'm coaching this week. So to set the scene, she and her very best friend, who she's worked with for 5 whole years for another company, are going into business together. And they're out of sync with their notice periods for whatever reason. So my client left that employment 3 months ahead of her best friend. So the best friend has just finished this other employment, and my client is full of her words, resentment, distrust, judgment, sadness, fear, questioning, and disappointment because she's feeling all of those things because the other person hasn't done anything to help. And she has forgotten that the other person has just been through a very difficult notice period, the same way that she did. And nothing is in place. They haven't even spoken, but she's sitting in this bitter, resentful place coming from there. And there's not even a partial agreement. It's not good enough. She hasn't done this, she hasn't done that. I'm like, okay, let's just zoom out. Have you spoken to her? And she was like, no. Okay, that's interesting. What would that be like? Why did you two decide to work together in the first place? And she very quickly, it was like a different person. She was like, well, we're best mates. We really respect each other's work. We've worked together for 5 years. She's got my back, I've got her back. There's such a deep trust between us. I'm like, oh, that sounds great. And then there's crumpled her over here and happy her over here. Shall we have a conversation? And she's got so scrunched by this that I'm going to have a conversation with both of them, not as a mediator. But she said, please don't make this like being a mediator, but I feel like we need that. But just as here's my coach, I know this other girl as well. So we're just gonna, just talk. But how fascinating she said, we haven't even spoken. And this deep friendship and the love that we've talked about, that had evaporated. And she'd been making something so personal and becoming so bitter and so all this overthinking happening. And that was the reality of an expectation without even the beginnings of agreement. There'd been lots of assumptions, all of these things. So I found it fascinating to on Sunday morning. That was the situation I was listening to. And what have you agreed? Well, that we'll work together, but they hadn't taken it any further than that, like as though it would just magically happen. It's okay. Let's create some agreements then. And that whole phrase, we're used to hearing it, but actually, I was talking to somebody the other day and I can't remember. Oh, Karen, it was you on Saturday. And we're like, there's coaches and then there's normal people. Was that you? Somebody said that to me over the weekend. And it's like, oh, okay. So coaches know all about expectation and agreement, but normal people, they don't. And this was the normal people bit. It wasn't about agreements and expectations, but that just came back to me then. Normal people is just full of expectation quite a lot of the time until they're pointed to, oh, okay, how about we create some agreements? So I just wanted to share that live example of the potential fallout between these two very dear friends through not having any agreement. The love was nearly lost. And he said, beneath this disappointment, beneath disappointment, there's love. Yeah, and it is there. But there was disappointment surfacing that didn't need to be there had they just taken a moment to, or had she taken a moment to zoom out.
I love that. Thank you. And the big takeaway, what I'm hearing is again communication and specifically asking. And I know that this was a blind spot for me and until I met Nick 3 or so years ago and have done some training with him. And a big part of the coach's toolkit is clarifying questions. It's like, can I just double check what you meant by that? I'm not actually super clear. And I think back to when I trained in music and I went to music college. I wouldn't ask questions in the classes because I didn't want to look like I didn't know. I wanted to be perceived a certain way. I was like, oh God, I don't understand any of this. I'm doing like some sort of jazz theory stuff. I'm like, I don't know. It's like, and that not seeing that asking was an option, I suppose out of fear, kept me from learning. Hence the distinction I repeat every domino that I initially created for myself. It's like, are you coming from a place of a visible learner or a perceived expert? Do you want to be perceived to know or to be seen a certain way, or are you open to learning and happy not knowing and asking the questions? Like, I'd be curious to know, did your client and share as much or as little as you would like. Did they give a reason for why they hadn't asked or created a conversation?
She'd simply become het up in, so this business that they're going to create together, she started it 3 months ahead and it has kicked off really quickly. So instead of her thinking, oh, I'll have a couple of easy months whilst the other person comes along, it's in PR and she's secured a lot more business than she expected. So behind it is tiredness, very much playing a part in it, and then getting into that hamster wheel of the long days and then resentment and disappointment have just sort of been bubbling. Yeah, so in our session we zoomed out And then we remembered all the reasons why this is going to be a great thing. And the other person, because they hadn't spoken, she's feeling quite left out. So, well, it's going to be mine too. So, and instead of it, somebody is talking about a little bit adult parent child, and we talked about that too. So, if it's in transactional analysis, are you both being adults here, or are you being something else? And there was a little bit of, yeah, something that wasn't quite grown-up adulting going on.
Amazing. Thank you. Is there any more you'd like to share for now?
No, good. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Kate. Jane.
I love how each time this topic is explored, there's more to see. I think that's the beauty of it. So if I may, I'd like to share my experience of the difference between agreements and expectations from an educational perspective, because you talked a few minutes ago about that's how you'd work with a child, or that what we'd say with a child. And I think there's a huge load that education puts on society that creates this way of thinking that we need expectations. I once created a conversation in school. Do we need rules? And that was a really interesting conversation, because my premise is we don't. What we need is conversation and not expectations. We need conversations and agreements. We don't need rules. Because if anybody else is like me, a rule goes, do that, then my brain, just like it says in here in one of the chapters, my brain immediately goes, oh, you want to do that? I'm going to do this. The exact opposite. So each time we create an expectation, actually what we do is we go, it's not my responsibility because I've made an expectation. It's over to you to do it. And what happens in schools is we go, these are the rules. These are the expectations. This is what you're supposed to do. And what happens is we then go, you didn't follow the rules. Here's your punishment. None of that creates anything. It just creates chaos. And so many, many years ago, early 2000s, through my introduction to TA, which Kate has mentioned and Karen commented on in the comments, I was introduced to something called contracting. And contracting is a TA process of creating an agreement. It's all about agreement. And ever since I was introduced to that, that's how I've worked in every group, class, leadership, CPD, whatever I'm doing. That's the process by which it's created. And the beauty of the process is it starts with the premise of, what do you want from me? What do I want from you? That's where it starts. And then you identify all the different elements within that. What do we want from? And you create an agreement. And then there's another question. So what happens if it goes wrong? So what happens if we break this agreement? Then what? How do we move forwards? Because, and it's almost like there's a knowing in that process that whatever we talk about at this point, we will have missed an element of it. So how do we then re-contract, re-agree this process? What are we going to do in that? And the beauty of this is I never needed rules in my classroom. I didn't need them. In the conversation, we'd have this conversation that would go, what do you need from me? What do I need from you? Equal. What do you need from your fellow students? What do they need from you? And we'd put in the other one. What does the school need from you? And what do you need from the school? And you'd get some amazing conversations in this process. To start with, they go, what do you mean? You just tell us what to do, don't you? But eventually they're going, oh, this is awesome. We can really go with this conversation. And they were so honest. And some beautiful agreements were created. And that taught me the power of agreement. But it highlighted something else, which is why agreement is so absent in the way we go as a daily life. I could have created a list of expectations, take me about 10 minutes, handed them over. This is what I expect. Get on with the teaching. That agreement creation was an entire lesson and an ongoing process. So for us, when we talk about agreement, we're investing time, energy, and honesty and integrity and ownership into the process, all of which we have a tendency not to want to have. So what I was seeing more in this was even more about how this is ongoing, even more about how this is a daily slowing down, even more about noticing when that hasn't taken place, noticing when I haven't made what do I want from this person clear, and they haven't made what they want from me clear. And looking for opportunities to create it.
Wow. That's amazing. There is so much in that, Jane.
Thank you.
What I've just written here is like humans are inherently creative. And by meeting your students in the middle in the way that you did, you tapped into their inherent creativity because agreements are created. Or I think, did you refer to it sort of as contracting?
It essentially we're creating an agreement because the questions are, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an agreement, isn't it? What do we want? How do we make this happen? Essentially, that's what it was. This is what we want. How do we make it happen? What does it look like? So whilst we never wrote an agreement, and this was the beauty of it, I didn't need anything written down because it was created in conversation. You know, there was no piece of paper that said this is what it looks like. That never existed and was never needed because it was all in conversation, and it was owned by all the people in the room, every single one of them equally, because every single one had equal input into it. And they got that and they understood that from the start.
Wow.
I've done that with a room of 150 in CPD as well.
What's CPD?
Continual professional development. So literally when training, I've used this process in training with a massive room full of people to get the same. The idea being is, how is this going to be most helpful for you? How are you going to get the most from this period of time we're spending together? So you can do it in large groups, you can do it in small groups, you can do it one-to-one. But essentially, it's about knowing the idea that You take this time, it pays back 20 million fold, to pick a number.
Well, in much the same way, well, there's enrollment going on there, right? And that part of what we learn when we're studying sort of the enrollment end of coaching is actually take the time to form a relationship, you know, and it will pay off.
Yeah.
I would love to ask, and again, you know, share as much or as little as you'd like. I'm really having taught not as a trained teacher, but peripatetic in schools. How widespread would you say this understanding currently is in education?
Can I say it goes about me and about 4 others, in my experience. So actually that's not true, because it was an approach that we used in my school. But it wasn't entirely used. Some of the staff fell back on, and this is why I see expectations or rules as an excuse for lack of ownership by the person who's imposing them. It's a free pass to making no effort. Some people fell back on those. And so we explored how and why that came about, and it was about their sense of security. But it came to me through a trainer who has in the past worked in schools. So I was exposed to this idea and then ran with it and explored it in 2 schools that I worked with. So, and others wider than that have experienced it when I've been training and things like that. But other than that, I can't speak to how widely it is. I would say that as schools feel time pressured, they fall more and more onto the "this is what you'll do" approach, which is what society seems to think is the right way forward. More rules will solve it. Never will, but that's what they think. More punishments, more rules. And that just reminds me that the other thought I had, which was, if we want to solve the problem of challenging behavior, as people would word it, not as I would word it, but that's the phrase that gets used. This is really important. This approach is really important. And let's use the same approach in coming to an understanding around where the behavior comes from and how to move forward from it. So that idea of restoration, conversation. But again, all of these things involve time, which people think they haven't got. And I point to that not as a truth, but not as a reality or a truth, but as their experience of it.
Wow. Thank you. Is there any more you'd like to share?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Devon, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. Jane, without adding an expectation to you, that would be a great TED Talk. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, my share is going to be rather brief. That was beautiful, and what's been shared here has already been really potent. The place that I wanted to point is disappointment. And like Jane said, the more you get into this distinction of agreement versus expectation, which I've been working with for a little bit now, a few years, and it's valuable every single time I go into it. It's valuable every single time that I bring it up in a conversation. when I invite other people into this distinction, they and their organizations get value from it and they thank me afterwards. It seems to be one of these universally like valuable distinctions. And in this book in particular, I was really struck with notice now I can notice disappointment and know that it's attached to an expectation. And I know what to do with it now. And I think for most of my life, I told Will, I was like, I realized I've been a terrible boss to myself. So of course, like the employee in myself as well has also been a terrible employee because it's just like, fuck you and your expectations and your goalposts that keep moving and your infinite game that nothing I do will ever be good enough. Like that's not a game to to enjoy or to thrive in. And so what I'm realizing now is that whenever I see a disappointment, it's a room, it's a space to see where an agreement could be made or revised. And to make it really practical, something that I wanted to share with you guys was just going from being really tough on myself to going, what are my actual expectations? I'm going to write them down. Okay, now from that, what are the agreements that I can make to actually complete on this? And I realized that it took a while, like Jane was saying, like it takes some time, it takes some effort. But at the end, the agreements that were made were like really simple. It's like, okay, you're going to work on these core things for this amount of time. That feels good daily. Cool. You're going to do these specific actions. Cool. We have an agreement there. So I was blind to the fact that if I was feeling disappointment, there was an unvoiced or yeah, there was an unvoiced expectation that needed to be cleaned up. And that distinction has just done such beautiful things in my life. I have one small little share. On top of that is a story, if we have the time.
Absolutely.
This is not a first-hand story, but a week or two ago, I saw this video talking about a CEO that was writing these long letters to the company. And one of the assistant comes in and goes, what are your priorities? Like, what are the priorities of this company? CEO gets all pissed and he goes, it's in your letter. Get out. And in the next few weeks, that person went around and asked all of the employees and all of the people of the team, what is the focus here? What's the priority? A few weeks later, goes back to the CEO with the list and the answers, and they're all over the place. There's clearly no understanding of what the priority is. Everyone thinks it's something else. And he sees it and is infuriated, tears up the letter, kicks out the person. And ultimately it created this opening to go, you are putting so much in your communication that it's not communication. No one's getting it. They're getting one line that they think they understand. And therefore you have an entire organization that is focusing on different things. Utter dysfunction. And then when they don't hit it, you're going to get more frustrated and over communicate more. That's not the way. So what I took away from this was the solution was brilliantly simple. And it was your communication needs to not be these long explanations. It needs to be no longer than 3 lines, 3 words per line. And that filter, even just in the past 2 weeks, even just with myself of like what I am committed to creating, like, okay, I get 3 lines and 3 words per line to communicate what I'm creating. That's it. And it's been such a beautiful filter.
I'm going to play with that. Thank you for sharing. I love what you shared about the sort of the internal boss and internal employee, and the first segment of this chapter, the example that's used is a factory. And when rereading it today, I made a note in the book. This is also an internal process, particularly where we're self-employed, particularly where we have our own passion projects, whatever sort of self-directed thing we're wanting to create. There's a situation where there's the thinker upper of ideas, and then there's the implementer of ideas. And that's where the expectations, there's a big focus in this chapter, I think, of expectations going out. So placing expectation on other people and the pitfalls of that. And the whole chapter can be reread through the lens of that also goes in this direction, the expectations we place on ourselves. And I've certainly also have been, will probably fall back into the trap of being the mover of my own goalposts. I want to do this thing, I want to do that. But you didn't quite hit the right standard, though, whatever that means. There's this other part of me that's now judging the standard of all this. And I call it hitting the big red button. And it's a point I'll sometimes reach, ever more occasionally. It used to be a lot more frequently, and it's the fuck it button. It's I've had enough of this, and I'm now able to wake up to the game I'm playing with myself, and it's oozing with expectation. Like, it's all over there. So thank you for sharing I've called it the 3-line game. It sounds like a nice way of cleaning up and simplifying what's going on there. Is there any more you'd like to share, Devon? Thank you. Elizabeth.
Thanks. This has all been really helpful. Really helpful. Jane, when you were talking about expectations and rules and school, it also made me think about the chapter that comes before this, which is what to, how to, or something along those lines, right? And when we're so ingrained that we, have to live up to certain expectations, have to follow certain rules, it's like, well, how do I do this and how do I do that? And it's completely taking away like creativity and initiative to want to do something and want to and that's like the beauty of the agreement, right? The creativity and the agreement. It's like tapping into wanting to play with it and wanting to like give a fuck about this, right? Yeah. So that made me think of that. And the reason I initially raised my hand, I mean, Devin, you hit it. You hit the nail on the head. For me, it was really around disappointment. And I loved how he, like, Will, you were talking about the reverse engineering, and I love how he like, okay, so start with disappointment. Like, you think you don't have expectations of other people? Let's see about that, right? What are you disappointed about? What are you pissed off about? And then I was like, oof, okay, I could make a really long list about that with my family, with my husband, with my kids, with like the situation around fill in the blank. And that was like, oof, okay. I need to be aware of like, I am actually creating a lot of expectations. I like don't want to admit that. Yeah. That's it for me right now.
And this sounds like a fresh realization.
Well, I've been aware that I have really high expectations of myself. But it's way bigger than that. And this helps to be able to pull it apart a little bit to make it more digestible and yeah, it makes it like not something that's like, oh, this is how I need to approach a situation, or this is like what I need to do. Like taking it apart, it's like, oh, okay. It could actually be really simple, and it can start with this. It can start with having a conversation with somebody else around what is it that is important to you? What is it that you want to do in the situation? Like even coming into agreement, like, do you agree to do this? Like that's coming in with expectations, right? Like it's listening.
That's reminded me of the first time I attempted to write up a client agreement list a couple of years ago, which was actually for guitar students. This is before I started coaching properly. And I took it to Nick Bettini. I was like, can you just double check, have a look? And he looked, he was like, have you noticed the language? It was expectations. I'd just written agreement at the top. It's completely no different. So, oh, okay. And that's where I first learned of like people use the word agreement, but are still in expectation mode. They're still harboring that, and there'll be some giveaway at some point in the way they communicate it. It's still a directive. It's still you will this.
Yeah. I feel like a big growth edge for me is agreements with clients and like retroactive agreements with clients. And I don't want to come in with like an agreement that's all like laid out. It's like that agreement needs to be created together, especially if it's like not the beginning of a coaching relationship. So I don't know. Well, I do know, but that's just where my head is right now.
Is there any more?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Tracy.
Hi, thank you for having me tonight, Will. It's been a pleasure coming tonight. For me, what sort of really came out of this for me was actually the judgment attached to expectations. If I find I'm judging somebody, I'm actually having expectations about that person. And I sort of went full circle on this because I sort of realized this might be what is a bit of a sticky wicket with my daughter-in-laws, because they've sort of come into the family and I've had these expectations about them as being part of the family. And therefore I'm judging them, which doesn't sit well. You know, when I had that sort of judging being connected with expectation, I thought, oh, that's not me. Why am I doing this? And actually, when I step back from that, I now know that if I'm actually judging somebody, I'm actually having expectations about them. So I can actually notice, I wasn't noticing that before. And since I've been listening to the Steve Chandler thing, I've noticed that when I'm doing that, I'm actually having it. And what is that expectation I've then got about that person? So it's having now that awareness that I didn't have before. Again, another light bulb for me. Well, thank you. But that has really helped me look at how I can better that relationship with my daughters-in-law without having those expectations on that relationship. And I think that will really, really improve it when I look at what it is I'm judging them for and what expectations I've got. If I can step back from that and remove those expectations, that's going to make my relationship a lot easier with them than it has been previously. So that's been really helpful to me. Thank you.
Amazing. I love that you've linked those two together. That makes perfect sense. I think I hadn't quite connected them in that way, so thank you. Is there any more?
No, short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. Sophie, I saw your hand up. Is that a cancelled hand up?
I think I'm just kind of struggling to put into words what it is I want to say. So I've been kind of writing notes all the way through. There's been some really interesting things that have come up, but I think originally I came into this and the first thing I wrote down is it really just as easy as not having expectations? Like, what if somebody doesn't meet their end of the agreement? And kind of hearing other people's views on it and experiences with it, I've kind of been basically writing down a stream of consciousness. And I think the conclusion I seem to have come to with it, especially with what Devon was saying about like that I've been a terrible boss to myself, so I've also been a terrible employee to myself, like really struck a note with me. Because like how can you exist when nothing you ever do is good enough for yourself? I think that really struck with me because I was thinking about the idea that like I don't know if anybody else experiences this, but I've just kind of come to a bit of a humbling realization that actually making agreements with other people is difficult because there's an element of control and not willing to compromise on your expectations and what you want from a situation that you won't necessarily get from making an agreement with somebody. That's quite like a hard thing to take on and be like, well, actually, you can't get everything that you want. And that if you want to have an adult conversation with somebody and have agreements, then you're not going to always get what you expect from someone. There's going to be compromise. And I think another part of that is like a lack of trust in whether those people are going to meet those agreements. But then that, I think, after hearing what everybody else has said, is that those agreements aren't actually complete. If they're not going to meet the agreements, then they weren't correct agreements in the first place. And that's quite an interesting concept to me. And I think that's just now I'm just thinking about again what Devon was saying about the stuff with himself. I was thinking to myself, like, well, how do I make an agreement with myself? Because I don't trust. There's a fundamental lack of trust in myself that I will meet my own agreement because the expectations are so high. But when you're the one setting the expectations, how can you then make an agreement with yourself that meets those standards? I think it's just I'm still kind of processing a lot of this at the moment, trying to work out how to come to some sort of happy medium. But yeah, that's why my hand kind of went up and down again because I'm still not quite there with it yet. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
It's amazing. No, thank you for sharing. And apologies if I unintentionally put a pressure there. That wasn't my intention. But
It's no worries at all. I've been an hour in about talking, but I didn't want to come in with a fully formed thought. But I think sometimes it's better to just word vomit and something comes out eventually.
no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Kate.
Thank you. Sophie, thank you for sharing that dilemma that I know that I find myself in as well. And we've talked about, are we good bosses to ourselves and what do we expect? And are we good employees to ourselves? And I started reading The Power of Systems. And something there about creating a system that supports the agreement that we're making with ourselves. And I found that quite useful. And it helped me to have a positive spin on. So the agreement to myself that it's around eating well rather than eating crap. And there's the why do I want to eat well, but there's what process, what system do I have to have in place so that I can eat well? Well, I need to shop So I need to let go of the story that I hate shopping, because actually I don't hate shopping, because if I go food shopping, then I can buy good food and then I can eat well. So there's a whole system about, okay, the system will support the agreement that I have to myself. So then I feel less frustrated if I don't do the thing. And I've only just started this book, and Steve Chandler talks about when he was wanting to not be an alcoholic, and it was like, well, what do I need to do? I was like, just choose to not drink, just in that moment, and then in the next moment, and then today, just don't drink today, and creating a system for choosing, because we've only got today. So if we make an agreement with ourselves, it's only for today. When we have those, well, I will eat really well for 6 months and then I'll be this thing, it can feel really overwhelming. So agreements, and then choosing a system or a process, and having that support for yourself as to why you want that process in place. And it just helps me, I've noticed, to have a more positive spin on it, a greater commitment. And it only has to be today, because tomorrow then it'll be today again, which I quite like that.
Thank you. Dennis.
Hello, group. Hey, Sophie, may I ask you a question? You know, you're talking about expectations and agreements and agreeing with yourself. And the thought that comes to my mind is, what's one agreement you can make with yourself?
I genuinely don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I'm sure objectively I make agreements with myself. Actually, not to overshare, but entirely to overshare, I made an agreement with myself a year ago to stop doing cocaine.
Okay.
I did that. And in a similar way of giving myself an agreement that every day I would have the little app on my phone that says, you are so many days sober from Coke. And I would look at that and I'd go, let's make it another day.
Don't do coke. Don't do coke.
Don't do Coke. Bad beer.
I think in general, we all agree that expectations are pretty much doomed to failure because there's no life in them. It's kind of like movies like The Blade Runner and other similar movies where society has entirely broken down and people are doing whatever it is they possibly can to get by for themselves, whether it's killing the guy next to them or stealing this guy's oxygen or taking that guy's water. You know what I mean? Um, and the more we do the things that are profitable and beneficial for us, the easier it becomes to do those things. So my question would be for you, what is one thing that you can do today? It doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering. Don't overthink it. What is one agreement that you could make with yourself today and fulfill that agreement and slowly get in the habit of completing agreements with yourself? Yes, life is that easy because you're going to find that it benefits you. You're going to find that it is profitable for you daily. And you're going to find that you feel better because you have actually made some type of a focus, some type of an agreement, and you kept it and you completed it, and it's done something to improve your day-to-day life. So I would just throw that up as a recommendation. And thank you for allowing me to share with you.
Thank you, Dennis. And I see, yeah, Devon, you've written, yeah, slowly get in the habit of completion, and I love that both of you have framed this as a habit, because habits are practiced. And yeah, thank you, Chris.
A thing that has come up for me over the course of this conversation, listening to you all, and I think it really crystallized, Tracy, with your comment about your daughters-in-law and having expectations about how they would fit into the family and then judging them because they didn't meet those expectations. And I realized that, and then rereading section 12 again here, where he talks about having no expectations whatsoever of any person at home. It feels so lighthearted and free. I think what it comes down to as well is whether it's the internal process, like Devin was speaking of, where I am the management and the employee, or in these external circumstances in our relationships with others. What this is really about by releasing this expectations is easing suffering. And why would we not want to do that? Why? Well, I think we'd each answer that question in our own way. But when we become so prone to, like Will, you spoke about, complaining about whoever wasn't pulling their weight on the gig or whatever. Gosh, I mean, I do it all the time, and that's a habit. It's a bad habit. But not paying attention, not giving it full attention in the moment, I am putting myself through more suffering, and it is I mean, it's insane. What is the point of that? So we benefit. I guess bottom line, connecting suffering to all of this and the potential to ease our own suffering, the suffering of others in these negotiations or in these agreements that we seek to make. I think that's the real gift here. And Chandler articulates it in his own way, but that's new for me as I've listened to you all speak about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Devon.
Ooh, that was good. Big fan of eliminating unnecessary suffering. Yeah, it's good, Chris. Thank you. I wanted to respond briefly to Elizabeth's share, because a little light bulb went off when she was sharing, and it was at the end, and it was that it really resonated for me. So I'll just speak from my own experience. What I heard was, wow, I have had such high expectations of myself that I even have embedded in that an expectation that I wouldn't create these expectations. That by somehow, like, I should have known this distinction before it was presented to me of creating agreements rather than expectations. And it wasn't lost on me. I was like, wow, interesting. And that's not how it works. And I can also go, whoops, yeah, I didn't know that for the majority of my life. So grateful to know it now. Thank you, guys.
I love that. Amazing. Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes left. Jane, would you like to finish us off?
Yeah, it was something that Chris said, and then followed by Devon. The judgment, and also linked to what Tracy said, the judgment thing, suddenly dawned on me. Living life without expectation, living life without judgment. I've mentioned this to Tracy a few times. I see the person behind the behavior. I see the soul, the individual separate from how they show up. And I've realized what that is. I see people, and this was very true, particularly in my school environment, working with children who other people didn't want to have in their classrooms. It's kind of like, there's a beauty in that. You connect, because you don't go, oh, you're doing this and I want you to do that, and you're not doing what I want you to do. You don't look at that. You just go, oh, I see you. I feel you. I know you. And it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful place to be. And it showed up for me even more powerfully. I had a conversation with Tracy about anticipatory grief. My mom has Alzheimer's. And we were having one conversation, and Tracy said something like, it's really difficult when you're losing them. And I very quickly came back at her and said, no, she's still there. And this is because I don't have an expectation of how my mum shows me she's my mum. She doesn't have to know who I am. She doesn't have to behave in a particular way. She doesn't have to say any particular things. I see her. I see her there. I have no expectations of how I see her. I just see her. And therefore, I'm not judging. I could be angry at what the Alzheimer's doing. I could be really angry, and I'm not. She's still there. I see her. And that's what came up for me. Devin, I've just seen your comment. I'd love to save the world. Wouldn't that be awesome?
You have the perfect last name for it too.
Yeah, I have the perfect last name for a teacher as well. Give me a reason. Give me a good reason. Yeah, here you are.
You need reason.
Jane, thank you. Thank you for that. It's amazing. And beautiful end to the call. Everyone, thank you so much for joining, for the regulars, for everyone who's joined in for today's call. Thank you for making it amazing. I will send out some emails with the replay just as soon as I've finished adding it to the playlist. And thank you. See you all soon.